Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Welcome to Resistance Live for Tuesday, November 12th. Hope you all had a peaceful and restful Veterans Day. We have so much going on already today and so much going on this week. It's pretty crazy. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to log in before we kind of like launch all the way into it. But live impeachment hearings start tomorrow. And, I hope you're all ready. They announced the schedule this morning for the hearings themselves. They will open at 10 a.m. Eastern. Based on the schedule that we've seen so far from the House Intelligence Committee, it's anticipated that this is going to be like an all-day event. They're going to go from 10 a.m., start opening statements at 10:05, and they will release witnesses somewhere between 2:30 and 4:30, depending on the nature of the testimony. So we have a lot to expect and to cover going forward for this week, but live impeachment hearings start tomorrow, and we're really in for it. So I hope you've all cleared your calendars for tomorrow and Friday. I'm going to be watching as much of it live as I can, and also obviously live tweeting it as much as I can. But we're really in for a hell of a week. So let's just talk through what we've got going on as of this morning and everything that we can kind of expect coming up this week. All right. So there's very big breaking news in the Roger Stone trial this morning. That, as you all know, he's been on trial now for a couple of weeks. This morning, the prosecution called Rick Gates to the stand. You will all remember Rick Gates, who cooperated with Robert Mueller, who pled guilty to a variety of offenses. His testimony, it's a bombshell is really the only way to put it, because what it directly did was implicate the president in this alleged conspiracy with WikiLeaks to release information to influence the election. One of the things that means, by the way, is that it now appears that Trump's responses to Robert Mueller under oath in writing were perjury, in part because Rick Gates was in a car with Donald Trump when he was on the phone with Roger Stone. It's about the upcoming WikiLeaks release. And so there just appears to be quite a weight of evidence now. We have to deal with the fact that it would be the DOJ that would prosecute him. We have to deal with the advice out of the Office of Legal Counsel that a sitting president can't be indicted. But after the fact, after Trump is removed, it looks like there's a pretty dead to rights perjury case against him right now, based on what Rick Gates testified to this morning. The other thing that was very curious about this is that Roger Stone's, so I should mention, right after Rick Gates testified, the prosecution rested. One of the things that's a little bit curious about where we find ourselves right now is that Roger Stone's defense had always claimed that he was going to be the anchor point to the defense of this case, that he would testify without question. It now appears that the defense is going to rest without putting on any evidence. And that may mean that we have closing arguments in this case as soon as tomorrow and a verdict by the end of this week. I don't think anybody expected that from the Roger Stone case, honestly. I don't think anybody thought that we were going to be in a situation where the Roger Stone case could be over in the same week the public impeachment hearings were ongoing. But that's how it's looking as of this morning. So in addition to the fact that we've got this apparently dead to rights perjury case against the president now, he did, his answers said he didn't recall, but, it's kind of, I don't know. I think they'd have a good case to try him on. It looks like we might find out whether or not Roger Stone is going to the clink by, it could be Thursday. I mean, it's crazy. So anyway, it's going to be a hell of a week here. So that's the first bit of breaking news this morning that we need to talk about. The second bit of big news this morning is that the Southern Poverty Law Center, which many of you know, monitors hate groups, white nationalism, various forms of white supremacy organizations, always has. I've supported them for years, by the way. My name is in a wall that they built against white supremacy going back like 15 years. In any event, they've done this incredible Hate Watch, which is an arm of the SPLC, has done a breaking bit of news, of journalism on Stephen Miller. They got a hold of some emails that Stephen Miller sent to Breitbart between 2015 and 2016 from a former Breitbart editor who has since renounced the alt-right. And I will just say this to all of you, the expose is terrifying. Miller was basically citing these incredibly fascist screeds that have been written, citing organizations that believe that the white race is being consciously exterminated by people of color, just really far out there, fascist ideology, and recommending that Breitbart write articles about it leading into the 2016 election. I know that we've all believed for quite some time that Miller was a white supremacist. All the evidence has certainly pointed in that direction. There's now confirmation through these emails that he has advocated fascist ideology, basically, in his communications with Breitbart leading up to the 2016 election. And that, of course, also confirms that all of his immigration policies, because, by the way, the immigration issue is at the top of these emails that he continued to send, that the immigration policies of the Trump administration are driven by a white nationalist agenda. We now have proof of that. I know that's not going to come as a shock to anybody who's watched this broadcast for the last 3 years, but the expose itself is damning. And you combine that with another bit of significant breaking news this morning, which is that the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments this morning on the DACA case. And this morning, Trump tweeted out various completely false statements about DACA recipients being hardened criminals. In fact, in order to qualify for DACA, you have to have limited to no criminal history whatsoever. Certainly a nonviolent criminal history, if any. In like most of the instances where people were granted DACA status, there was no criminal history whatsoever. The ideology that the president is spouting this morning lines up, of course, quite tidily with Stephen Miller's white supremacy. And so that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Now, I want to make a couple things clear about this DACA case. I want to remind you all that we do not get rulings out of the Supreme Court on the same day that oral argument is held. In fact, in a case of this serious significance, it impacts 700,000 people inside the United States. There is a likelihood at this point that we will not have a ruling on this until the spring. In fact, my expectation would be that the ruling on this particular case will probably be one of the last ones that's announced because of its significance. So that means, of course, that at the end of the term, I will remind you all that Supreme Court terms usually run from October to June. So we may not hear a ruling on this case until June of next year. We will have some flags today as to the nature of the questions that were asked, and that is sometimes considered to be a little tea leaf reading on where the justices may come out. But, again, I'm not expecting a ruling on the DACA case until 2020 at the earliest, meaning like in the spring. That said, there's ongoing protests. I really encourage you to follow the hashtag #HomeIsHere today on Twitter, because there's ongoing reports coming out of the Supreme Court oral argument on that, and also on the protests that are taking place in front of the Supreme Court. Okay, we had another breaking story yesterday about Trump's taxes, which is that a DC district court judge, you will remember that we have this simultaneous case that's going up through the Second Circuit in New York, Federal Court of Appeals. We had a ruling last week saying that the Manhattan district attorney should have access to Trump's taxes. There's a parallel case that has been filed in the DC district court that got squished yesterday, for that's a term of art, I'm kidding, that literally got a ruling yesterday saying that no, the Manhattan district attorney, like Trump can't challenge the Manhattan district attorney's attempts to seek his taxes in the DC district court. The ruling in that case was from a Trump appointed judge. So that was a bit of a surprise here, is that this is actually a district court judge that was appointed by Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump's taxes are accessible by the Manhattan district attorney and that he can't challenge it in DC district court. So that was a very interesting development yesterday. And again, none of this bodes particularly well for Trump. That means it's relatively good news for us. But I think everybody was a little bit surprised, frankly, that this Trump-appointed judge has ruled in the way that he did. Again, I will remind you all that there are indications that the Second Circuit case that was decided last week will go up on a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will then decide whether or not they're going to take the case. If they take the case, we will probably see oral argument sometime in December. We'll see. Again, that's one of those ones where we're waiting for a decision out of the Supreme Court as to whether or not they're going to actually take the case. And the writ of certiorari will be reviewed this month. All right. Related to that particular issue, I just want to mention that one of you asked a question about this issue of the fact that 1/4 of the judges on the federal bench now have been appointed by Donald Trump. This is something that we've been talking about on this broadcast for the last 3 years, that there have been efforts to pack the courts by the Trump administration. There have been several instances in the last 3 years where Chuck Schumer has rolled over on this, which has made those of us who care about these sorts of issues very concerned. There was a question about removal. So I'm going to remind you all, federal court judge appointeeships are life appointments. So removing a judge from the bench is incredibly difficult after they have been voted into that position by the Senate. Again, this is one of those things, elections matter. The Senate has a majority Republican, has had it for the last 3 years. That means that even in cases where they split very closely, if everybody votes along Republican Party lines, Trump's judges get appointed. Schumer has had some control over the timing of that review. And again, we've had quite a number of judges appointed now who have not passed the American Bar Association standards, who have been deemed to be unqualified and have nonetheless been appointed to the bench. Just this weekend, there was an announcement now that Trump is no longer going to consider whether or not the American Bar Association has approved of a candidate in nominating that person for a federal judgeship. The way the judges get removed after they've been appointed is through a process that is very similar to impeachment. You can impeach a federal judge. There has to be an allegation of improper conduct that rises to the level of impeachment. There can also be, by the way, judicial ethics investigations that can sanction a judge or put them on inactive status. There's a variety of ways in which that could be pursued. But is there going to be like a wholesale rolling back of all these judges that have been appointed to the federal bench by Trump? No, there's no way to do that. There's no way under law to do that. Every individual judge is going to have to be considered based on their conduct on the bench. Again, it's not out of the question that some of these judges could be removed if they have acted in ways that are improper or there are ethics allegations made with regard to their conduct. Are we going to just see all these appointments wiped out once Trump is removed from office? No, we're not going to see that. And that should concern everyone. It's not the whole bench. I will remind you all that, even in instances where conservative justices have been appointed, there are certain principles of law that they're required to follow. We saw that obviously in the case yesterday that said that Trump's taxes could be pursued by the Manhattan District Attorney, leaving aside the fact that this was a Trump appointee. He ruled against Trump. So again, we have to remember that it's not a wholesale, series of disgust. Some of these judicial appointees have been far worse than others. But again, if there are indications that there has been unethical conduct or there are questions raised about, the judicial conduct of a particular nominee, a particular judge, those will be considered in individual cases as potential causes for removal. Again, it's 1/4 of the federal bench. That still means 3/4 of the bench have been appointed by other presidents. I, again, have been, concerned about this, but cautious in my predictions. But it should worry everyone. I'm not going to tell you it's not something to be concerned about. He's appointed lifetime judges. And this, by the way, is one of the things that the Koch brothers and the Mercers have been after for 30 years in this plan to get, Republican control of the presidency and the Senate in a way that allows them to pack the bench. It's of concern. It's definitely of concern. All right. The big news for this week, which we talked about a little bit at the top of the broadcast, but let me go into some more detail about this, is that impeachment hearings are starting tomorrow. Public impeachment hearings are starting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. The schedule for tomorrow was released, as I said at the top of the broadcast. Hearings are called to order at 10. Opening statements by Schiff at 10:05. There will be questions following the resolution structure that was passed in the House 2 weeks ago, meaning that there will be 45 minutes of questioning per side, only by Schiff, Jim Jordan apparently now, and counsel for the Intelligence Committee. So we don't know what that's going to look like. It could be Barry Burke. It could be Norm Eisen. In any event, the people who are on our side of the fence for that are very skilled questioners, and we can expect that there is going to be quite a bit more progress on that front without question. The public hearings are, of course, going to be must-see TV. My expectation at this point is that we are going to see quite aggressive questioning from the Democrats. There should be at this stage of the game. And by the way, the witnesses that they have called this week are among the ones whose transcripts have already been released. We know we can expect, and I'm looking particularly toward Friday when Yovanovitch is going to testify, that this will be scathing testimony with regard to the president's extortion and bribery of Ukraine. So must-see TV tomorrow without question. A couple of you asked about this issue that was flagged at the end of last week, where the Republicans put out this list of people that they wanted to call as witnesses, including Hunter Biden. And, I mean, the list was nuts, right? Like, can I just say that? Like, the list was nuts. It included like Alexandra Chalupa, who is a Twitter personality now, but also was deeply involved in Ukrainian policy at one point. It included the wife of a DOJ official who is accused of being in the deep state. There's a serious, effort by the Republicans to distract. Well, the good news about this is that the resolution that was passed by the House says that, and Schiff has since confirmed this, of course, even though that's what the resolution says, so he should have. They can't just randomly call anybody that they want. They're not allowed to derail the impeachment proceedings by calling random witnesses that don't have any bearing on the exact evidence that's been presented. There is a process laid out in that resolution by which they have to demonstrate that Republicans, as the minority, have to demonstrate that the witness is likely to bring relevant evidence to the matter being considered. They're not going to be able to do that with regard to Hunter Biden, because the matter that's being considered is whether or not the president was bribing Ukraine with foreign aid, with aid money, to get a false investigation started. Hunter Biden is not a relevant witness to the president's conversations with Zelensky. So they're going to have a really hard time with this particular claimed set of things. They're going to throw a lot of shit at the wall. That's my expectation. They're kind of like, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. All their allegations are going to be about process. And I will remind you all that, the line from the Republicans about this right now is crazy, because first they were like, we need public hearings. We're going to storm the SCIF because all of this should be public. And now that they're public, like the president made a statement over the weekend of like, they shouldn't be holding public hearings on anything. Again, reminder, they're not attacking the substance of anything because they don't have a leg to stand on. It's obvious when you look at the substance of the testimony and the transcripts and what we're going to hear tomorrow and Friday, in my expectation, it's obvious that that literally the president has been engaged in crimes. Like, they don't have a leg to stand on the substance of the evidence and the allegations. So they're going to try a lot of different shiny objects. Like, the president is claiming he's going to release the transcript of his first call with Zelensky after Zelensky was elected. And, that in and of itself is going to be a nothing burger, right? So let me just say this. I know there's a lot of you out there who are really worried about what the Republicans are going to try to do in terms of distraction tactics. There's no distracting from public impeachment hearings. Like, I just want to make that really clear. Like, anybody who lived through Watergate will tell you that there's no distracting from public impeachment hearings. They're not going to be able to pull attention away from these witnesses who are testifying this week. And by the way, Schiff also announced this morning that they're going to make additional announcements about witnesses who are going to testify publicly within the next few days. So this is just the start of where we find ourselves right now from the public standpoint of all of this. All right. The other thing that I'm just going to mention here is that the president himself, again, no shocker here, especially for those of you who have been watching the broadcast for a long time and understand extinction bursts, there is no shocker he is doing is actually now at this point fabricating things to try to have some form of defense to the indefensible. So over the weekend, he claimed, for instance, that not only had Schiff completely fabricated a call transcript, which he didn't, he also is now claiming that the deposition transcripts that were taken that have been made public are fabricated. That in and of itself, by the way, has not been a claim that's been made by any Republican operative. It's also a claim that, is patently false. Like what I said about this on Twitter yesterday is that it's shocking that he's even trying this, because between the House committee members, the House staffers who have been present for this, and the court-appointed court reporters, who, by the way, have to take their own oath that what they are recording is true, nothing but the truth, and so help them God. There's got to be at least 50 people at any given instant who could have been present for the testimony of every witness whose deposition was taken. Okay, so like the president is now up against like, in the best case scenario, like dozens of witnesses for every single person who has given a deposition inside the SCIF. There's just no way that claim is going to hold any kind of water. It's not going to stop him from being out there spouting it, but there's no way that it's going to hold any water in terms of any form of a defense. And certainly public impeachment hearings where we're all going to be able to watch live what's happening and listen live to what's happening. That's the evidence that's going to support his impeachment. So, it's a very dramatic week here. And, I want to remind you all to not, I felt like on the question feed this morning, there was just a lot of paranoia and nervousness about what the Republicans are going to try to pull here. Just please understand this. Like, what we're going to witness this week is going to be riveting, must-see TV. There's going to be wall-to-wall media coverage of it. Nothing the president says or does is going to be able to detract from witnesses to his crimes taking an oath, sitting down and answering questions about it. They don't have a leg to stand on. So the real question now, and I mean, again, we're in this kind of like inevitability at this point about where this is leading. Once we have public hearings, there are going to be articles of impeachment submitted. Those articles of impeachment, I'm just going to call it because it's obvious, are going to pass House Judiciary. They're going to pass the House, and we're going to move on to a trial in the Senate. Again, I'm going to remind you all from the standpoint of your own activism, your action, your engagement, the Senate is where it's at. What's going to happen this week is going to be very important for public perception, but the Senate is where we need to focus our influence and our voices. Because honestly, the real question now is not whether or not the president is going to be impeached. The real question is whether or not he's going to resign or be removed. And, you know, that has to do with the nexus of power in the Senate. It also, by the way, has to do with what the Republican Party is perceiving as their threat from what is happening here. So, you know, again, this is a week to be very conscious about making your voices heard toward those moderate senators. I will remind you all, we only need to flip 20 people. That's not a huge number. 3 senators have, by the way, refused to sign on to that resolution in the Senate condemning the House impeachment proceedings. Those 3 senators are Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. I have no faith in Susan Collins after Kavanaugh. I share that with all of you. But the fact that there are 3 Republican senators who are unwilling to sign on and that Mitt Romney is perceived to be a leader of the moderates within the Senate is a sign that there is a big crack in that wall. And the more pressure that's levied against it, the more likely it is that the wall will tumble. So there's a lot more that needs to be done from our perspective, from a working perspective on all of this. All right. And I'm just going to say there are big indications right now as to the reason why this is very important for 2020. I'm just going to add this little bit of news into all of this. Okay. Because, by the way, this is directly relevant to our election next year. So all of you know that there is right now an ongoing general election in the UK. This has been called as a result of the inability to get Brexit finished. Boris Johnson is up for, he's the prime minister. He called this, he's up for re-election. And the election is being held in early December. This is a very tight timetable for a general election in the UK. 2 things have happened over the weekend that are directly relevant to our election in 2020. The first is that there is a report that is being squashed by Boris Johnson's administration about Russian influence in the Brexit campaign, literally about how Russia utilized money from 6 Russian oligarchs to influence the vote in Brexit. And they know who those oligarchs are, and they are refusing to make the report public. The thing that is very dangerous about this from our standpoint is that it is keeping information from us that we need in order to protect our elections. So that's the first breaking thing out of the UK that's very troublesome. The second thing is what happened this morning. And this, by the way, is something that I really feel like we all ought to be paying like grave attention to. The party platform on their digital platform was attacked this morning by the Russians. There was a digital interference, like a widespread cyber interference that began this morning of Labour, which, by the way, is one of the 2 parties that obviously is running against Conservatives. Some Labour people are in favor of Brexit. Liberal Democrats are generally opposed to it. But the point being, the Labour Party has traditionally been the left-leaning party inside the UK. The Labour Party election digital platform was completely disrupted this morning by the Russians. So we can see by watching what's happening in the election right now in the UK, what we can expect will happen here in the event that Trump is not removed and that we're facing down a 2020 election with like basically unfettered interference by the Russians and potentially others into our election systems. It's really bad. And, you know, again, I want us all to be paying attention to what's happening there because it's a predictor for what's going to happen for us next year. So there's a lot to be mindful of in the context of where we find ourselves with regard to impeachment, not the least of which is the security of the 2020 election. And I just, you know, again, this is a reason why if you have not had your energy up to make your phone calls recently, or you have not gone to your local, you know, reps, senators' offices and given them a piece of your mind about impeachment, now is the time to do it because his removal, his absolute removal is the only thing that is going to prevent kind of widespread interference in our election next year. And we all need to be ready for it. You know, it's one of those things where we're more ready for it now than we were in 2016, but, you know, so are they. And, you know, the tools that the Russians have available to them, both cyber and in terms of information peddling and influence, are huge. Facebook isn't stopping any of it. We already know that. So we're in a position now where the influence that we are able to levy is in part, with regard to impeachment, is in part going to have something to do with whether or not we actually have a free and fair election next year. So, if you're tired of all of this, if you're nervous about calling your senator, I want to encourage you to do that. Not only because it matters for purposes of impeachment, but also because it matters in terms of whether or not we're actually going to be able to elect another president next year, and a president who, could beat him. If with everything that we know about what happened in 2016, the gutting of cybersecurity inside the State Department, the fact that Kristen Nielsen, we know, took efforts to protect the 2018 election in direct contravention of Trump's lack of concern about it, and she's gone now. We have a lot to deal with on this front, and his removal is the only thing that is going to get us to the point of potentially having free and fair elections in 2020. So it's not just about impeaching Trump for his crimes. It really is also about the future of our election system, the safety of our democracy, human rights issues, which are, at this point, as we all know, my view is that he should have been impeached on those years ago. But this is where we find ourselves right now. There's a lot of ongoing issues that are pressing, but watch what's happening with Brexit and this election in the UK, because honestly, from the standpoint of everything that I am looking at right now, it is a predictor of where we are going to find ourselves starting in January if we don't actually take the action now to remove this president. All right. That's it for today. We do, as I have mentioned now repeatedly, we do have live impeachment hearings starting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. So get ready for that. I will broadcast tomorrow as planned. What we know by then is what we will talk about. Just a forecast for this week. Thursday, there's likely to be either an audio-only broadcast or a broadcast very early in the morning California time, because I unfortunately have a bunch of stuff going on in Los Angeles that day that can't be changed. But tomorrow and Friday, we will be here regular time. Thursday is going to be a little bit glitchy. And obviously, I will be live tweeting as much as I can, given the day job, while we're watching the hearings tomorrow and Friday as well. All right. Much love to all of you. Reminder, please share this broadcast with your friends and family. We're also aiming to get you guys a bonus video, which we're now doing quarterly for those at $10 and up starting this week. We've got new swag in the tiers and all sorts of other things happening on Patreon. So thank you all so much for your support, and I will talk to all of you tomorrow. Much love. Bye.